I met up with my boyfriend to unload a TV I'm gifting him, and he says I'm too literal. I genuinely cannot tell if I'm losing my mind or if my boyfriend and I just communicate like two completely different species. What started as a simple plan involving a TV somehow turned into a full argument about whether I'm too literal, and now I'm sitting here replaying the whole thing, wondering if I somehow accidentally became difficult without realizing it. For context, my boyfriend and I live in the same apartment complex. Different buildings, but close enough that we basically spend most nights together anyway. Half the time, one of us just walks across the parking lot carrying a hoodie and a phone charger like we're commuting between apartments. Overall, our relationship is actually pretty good. We get along well, we laugh a lot, and we usually handle disagreements pretty calmly. But there's one recurring issue that drives me absolutely insane: his relationship with time. When I say this man has no understanding of time, I mean genuinely none. Everything is always 5 minutes. Getting ready, 5 minutes. Stopping at the store, 5 minutes. Finishing a phone call, 5 minutes. Meanwhile, actual reality could be anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours. At first, I thought it was kind of funny. Then, over time, it became one of those small relationship issues that slowly wears on you. Because after a while, it stops being about time. It starts becoming about reliability. Like, if somebody constantly tells you they'll do something in 10 minutes and it actually happens 45 minutes later, eventually you stop trusting what they say. And honestly, I don't think he even realizes how often he does it. Anyway, a few days ago, I had an older TV sitting in the back of my car. It wasn't brand new or expensive or anything, but it was still decent, and I didn't need it anymore. He'd mentioned wanting one for his guest room, so I told him he could have it. The only annoying part was that it was heavy. Not impossible to carry, but definitely a two-person job, especially because his apartment building doesn't have an elevator and the TV needed to go up multiple flights of stairs. Still, it didn't seem like a big deal. We already lived in the same complex. Easy. Or at least I thought it would be easy. The TV sat in my car for about 3 days because our schedules kept not lining up. Every time I brought it up, he'd say something like, "Yeah, we'll do it tomorrow." Then tomorrow would come and something else would happen. Again, not a huge issue, just mildly annoying. Then Sunday happened. He stayed over at my place Saturday night, and we both slept in late Sunday morning. At one point, he suddenly looked at his phone and immediately panicked. Apparently, he had completely lost track of time and was now running late for some family event he needed to drive to. And when I say running late, I mean aggressively late. The kind of late where someone starts moving around the apartment at triple speed while muttering stressed out comments under their breath. He started throwing clothes on, gathering things, brushing his teeth while simultaneously looking for his keys. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting there half awake watching this tornado happen. Then he says, "Okay, let me go shower at my place real quick. I'll be like 10 minutes. You can pull the car up with the TV." That sounded straightforward to me, very straightforward. In my mind, we had just made a simple verbal plan. He would go to his apartment, shower quickly. I would bring the car over. We'd carry the TV upstairs together. Then he'd leave for his family thing. Easy. So I got dressed slowly, grabbed my book, and drove over to his building. And because I know him and his 10 minutes are never actually 10 minutes, I intentionally didn't rush. I took my time. I think I got there around 15 or maybe 20 minutes later, which, honestly, already felt generous. When I pulled up, his car was still there. Not surprising. I parked nearby and figured he'd come down soon. It was hot outside, so I stayed in the car with the air conditioning running and started reading my book. At first, I genuinely didn't care. I was relaxed. I had nowhere else to be. But then 20 minutes passed. Then 30. And at that point, I started getting annoyed. Not furious, just irritated in that very specific way where you realize somebody once again treated your time like it doesn't really matter. I kept glancing up from my book, expecting to see him walk out of the building. Nothing. No text, no update, no, hey, sorry running behind, nothing. Finally, I sent him a playful text. At least it started playful. I wrote, "Hey, what does 10 minutes mean in your world? Got an ETA?" Honestly, I expected some goofy response. Something like, "Haha, sorry, almost done." Instead, he replied, "I'm getting in my car." The second I read that message, my irritation instantly spiked. Because I was literally parked near his car, and he was absolutely not getting into it. I could physically see that he was not getting into it, which immediately made me think, wait, does he think I'm not here? And then a second realization hit me. If he thinks I'm not here, is he just planning on leaving? Like, is this man about to drive off to his family event while I'm sitting outside his building with a heavy TV we specifically agreed to move together? So I texted back something like, "I've literally been sitting here waiting with the TV." And somehow that completely set him off. Suddenly he was annoyed with me. Not mildly annoyed, actually irritated. He immediately responded, "Why didn't you tell me you were here?" That confused me so badly, I honestly stared at my phone for a second, trying to process what he meant. Because, what? In my head, I had already told him, verbally, when we made the plan. He said, "Pull the car up with the TV," which I did. Why would I additionally need to announce here like I was arriving for a dentist appointment? Especially because his instruction already implied I was coming. So I replied, "I thought we already had a plan." And that's when the argument really started. He started insisting I took his words too literally. Apparently, when he said, "Pull up, I'll be 10 minutes," what he actually meant was apparently something closer to, "Eventually come over at some unspecified time and then notify me of your exact arrival status so I can decide what's happening from there." Which honestly sounded insane to me. I told him that if the plan had changed, then he was the one who should have communicated that. Like, if he suddenly realized he didn't have time to move the TV anymore, all he had to do was text, "Hey, sorry, can't do it today." Or, "Hey, where are you parked?" Or literally anything. Instead, he somehow acted like the communication breakdown was entirely my fault because I didn't send a separate "I'm here" message. At this point, he finally came outside. And honestly, the energy between us immediately felt weird. Not explosive, but tense. That quiet relationship tension where both people think they're obviously correct. He walked over to the car looking frustrated, while I sat there trying not to get more annoyed. And the whole interaction instantly became awkward. The TV suddenly felt symbolic of something much bigger than a TV. Which sounds ridiculous, but I think anyone in a long-term relationship understands what I mean. Sometimes small situations become arguments because they connect to larger patterns, and this absolutely felt like one of those moments. Because, from my perspective, this wasn't just about texting "here." It was about constantly adjusting my expectations around somebody who never means exactly what they say. If he says 10 minutes, I automatically mentally convert it into 30. If he says he's leaving soon, I know he probably hasn't even found his keys yet. If he says we'll do something tomorrow, I know there's a decent chance tomorrow won't happen. And over time, that becomes exhausting. Not because every single incident is catastrophic, but because small frustrations stack. And eventually, you start feeling like the more responsible partner by default. Anyway, we started carrying the TV upstairs, and somehow even that became tense. The whole time, I kept replaying the argument in my head, because genuinely, I could not understand his logic. If two people verbally agree on a plan, why would one person need to reconfirm the exact same plan 30 minutes later? Especially when the original instruction already included the action. To me, saying, pull the car up with the TV, already inherently means I will be expecting you shortly with the TV. Apparently not. Halfway up the stairs, he said, "You're just really literal sometimes." And honestly, that comment irritated me more than the original situation, because it felt weirdly dismissive, like somehow expecting words to mean what they mean was a personality flaw. I asked him, "How else was I supposed to interpret what you said?" And he shrugged, which somehow made it worse, because it felt like even he couldn't fully explain his own thought process. Eventually, we got the TV upstairs and set it down in his apartment. And at that point, I honestly expected us both to calm down. Instead, the conversation kept spiraling. He said normal people usually text when they arrive somewhere. And sure, sometimes they do. But I pointed out that normal people also usually update others when they're running dramatically later than expected, especially when somebody is waiting on them. And that's when the conversation shifted from the TV situation into a broader argument about communication styles. He started saying I make assumptions. I said he gives vague instructions. He said I expect people to think exactly like me. I said I expect basic follow-through. At one point he actually said, "Well, in my head, if you were here waiting, you obviously would have texted me." And I replied, "Well, in my head, if you knew I was bringing the TV, obviously you'd assume I arrived." And honestly, neither of us could convince the other. That was the frustrating part, because this wasn't one of those arguments where one person clearly did something horrible. It felt more like two people experiencing the exact same situation through completely different mental frameworks. But even understanding that didn't stop me from being annoyed, because at the end of the day, I was still the one sitting in a parking lot for 30 minutes waiting. And somehow, I ended up being blamed for the communication failure. That part bothered me a lot. After he finally left for his family event, I went back to my apartment, still irritated. And honestly, the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. Because if the roles were reversed, I genuinely can't imagine reacting the way he did. If I told somebody, "Come over, I'll be 10 minutes," and then they showed up while I was running late, my first reaction would be, "Oh my God, sorry, I lost track of time." Not, "Why didn't you announce your arrival?" That's the part I can't get past. Later that evening, he called me. By then, we'd both calmed down a little. And honestly, the conversation was more productive. He admitted he forgot the TV was still in my car, which honestly explained a lot. Apparently, after showering, he got distracted getting ready for the family event and mentally shifted into travel mode. So in his head, when he texted, "I'm getting in my car," he genuinely thought he was just updating me about leaving. That actually made the situation make more sense. But weirdly, it also made me slightly more annoyed, because forgetting entirely about the TV somehow felt worse than intentionally delaying. Like, how do you forget the entire reason I'm outside your building? Still, hearing his side helped. And to his credit, he eventually admitted he probably should have updated me sooner. But he also still maintained that texting here would have avoided the entire problem. And honestly, maybe he's right. That's the annoying part. Because logically, yes, texting here probably would have prevented the misunderstanding. But I still feel like that misses the bigger issue, which is that I shouldn't have needed to micromanage a plan that already existed. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this argument wasn't really about communication alone. It was about mental load. Because in relationships, one person often unconsciously becomes the tracker, the person who remembers timelines, the person who follows up, the person who confirms details, the person who keeps things moving. And honestly, I think I've quietly become that person in our relationship. Not because he's malicious, not because he's lazy, but because he naturally moves through life in a much looser, less structured way than I do. And usually that difference balances out fine. Sometimes his spontaneity is actually good for me. I can be overly structured, overly planned, overly exact. Meanwhile, he's more relaxed, more flexible, more go with the flow. Normally that dynamic works, but occasionally it creates moments like this where I feel like I'm living in an alternate reality. Because to me, verbal plans are commitments. To him, verbal plans seem more like flexible outlines. And honestly, maybe neither of us is fully wrong. But I still think if somebody says they'll be 10 minutes and another person waits 30 minutes outside in a parking lot with a heavy TV, the person who kept the other waiting probably owes a little more accountability. At minimum, sorry, I lost track of time, instead of, why didn't you tell me? That's really the core of why this whole thing upset me. Not the waiting, not the TV, the immediate instinct to redirect responsibility. Because when small misunderstandings happen in relationships, I think the healthiest response is usually, oh wow, okay, I see how that happened. Not instantly trying to prove the other person communicated incorrectly. Still, after we talked longer, things eventually softened. He apologized for forgetting about the TV. I admitted I probably could have just texted here and avoided the whole mess. And eventually, we both started laughing about how absurdly dramatic the entire situation became over a used television. But honestly, part of me is still curious what other people think, because I genuinely cannot tell whether I'm actually too literal or whether expecting people to mean what they say is a completely reasonable expectation. Maybe the answer is somewhere in the middle. Maybe we're both just bad at communication in very different ways. Or maybe this is just one of those weird couple arguments that sounds unbelievably stupid from the outside, but somehow feels massive in the moment.